So this morning, let us reflect for just a moment on what it might mean to set our hopes in God and not forget the works of God. What does it mean to set our hopes in God and not forget the works of God given this week? First, it does not mean to set our hope in one person or one group of people. We are to set our hope in God alone. Tuesday's election was notable in its peacefulness and participation, but it was not itself the apocalypse. Each person who was elected is a person who we hope and pray will work hard for the public good. But God alone can protect and provide. No person or elected office can do that. If we begin to think of our elected officials as themselves gods, we set them up for failure, and we turn them into the idols that the people are warned of in today's reading from Joshua. People of any office or title are people, and we work with them in this world, but we hope in God alone. Second, to hope in God does not mean that we believe or say that everything is fine. We know that everything's not fine. Our fears, our pains, our disappointments, our longings, these are real. To ignore or forget them is to ignore the world in which God placed us to live out our lives, in which we are to live out the love of God. We do not hope without looking at our present or knowing that future difficulties will arise. Christian hope demands wide eyes and wisdom. What does it mean to set our hopes in God and not forget the works of God in this moment? It means believing that God can break into the world and is doing so. We see the inbreaking of God in our community here at St. Peter's as we come to know the love of God and one another better. We see the inbreaking of God in the care that St. Peter's provides for the prisoners and their families, and the families assisted by St. Peter's in the Covenant to Care program. We see the inbreaking of God in how this community rallies around our congregants when they face crisis and grief and change. And I believe that we saw the inbreaking of God this week in the possibility of healing race relations in this country. We see the inbreaking of God who created the heavens and the earth, who led Israel out of Egypt, and who will come again in great glory and is capable of doing marvelous things. There's a certain attraction to being cynical and not believing that anything can change. But to snidely think that all is corrupt and cannot possibly be corrected, even by God, lures us into thinking that God is not active in our world and will not bring about a new thing. Cynicism stops us from telling the stories of good news to ourselves and to our children yet unborn, because it stops God's inbreaking dead in its tracks. God is all-powerful, greater than our unbelief, but if we say again and again and start to believe that God cannot change and act in our world, then we've stopped putting our hope in God. And we have stopped telling the stories and stopped being Christ's hands and heart in the world. To set our hopes in God and to not forget the works of God in this moment is to believe that God can and will surprise us. Just as the bridesmaids were surprised in the gospel story and Simeon was surprised at the temple. Even though Jesse Jackson wept in joy on Tuesday night, many people went to bed Tuesday and woke up Wednesday fearful about our new leadership. Fearful at least in part because some of our newly elected officials don't look like all of us in age or race or ethnicity or marital status. Those who fear just might be surprised. In age and ethnicity and marital status, Jesus looked nothing like many of us. And yet we believe as Christians that he did in his life on earth and continues in his participation in the Holy Trinity to care deeply for each of us and our interests. I am not saying that because of the way he looks that President-elect Obama or any elected official is a Christ-like figure. But I am saying that to think that someone who doesn't look like us cannot affect change on our behalf goes against the Christian principle that Jesus Christ was and is for us, even if he didn't look like each of us during his time on earth. I am saying that to open ourselves to the possibility of being surprised by leadership and assistance from unlikely places is deeply Christian and part of putting our hope in God. So let us take this moment and meet it with hope. Hope that when we look back on our days, we will see the hand of God at work in these moments of our history. For the Lord commanded our ancestors to teach these stories of our history to their children, that the next generation might know them, the children yet unborn, and rise up and tell them to their children, so that they might set their hope in God and not forget the works of God. Amen.